Bookseller Crow on the box. Tales from an empty bookshop.
Action.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Bookseller Crow for our next in our series of talks from an empty bookshop. And tonight, in the lovely heat, we have Liz and Beth, known as E. Foley and B. Coates, to join us here, who are authors of the best-selling series Homework for Grown-Ups and also What Would Boudicca Do? And you visited us in 2018 to be exact.
It does feel like a different era.
I was just saying to him, I'm having trouble knowing what on earth is going on in time. But yes, with it was one of our best-selling titles, and also you were on the crest of the wave, I felt, of a sort of new form of feminist publishing, and so that's great, and hopefully this You Goddess, with which you're here with your new title, will be a similar bestseller. So the latest title is An Irreverent Guide, illustrated by Georgia Perry. Very important to emphasise the illustrator in this. And it charts a series of fierce and fantastic deities to help us think about and conquer today's world. These are the myths and stories I wish I had been introduced to at my All Girls Comprehensive. But there was a different type of leader then, Maggie Thatcher in Maggie's Britain, that was kind of not at all like this. So I was just wondering if you could then, after that big lead up, perhaps introduce the book, perhaps in your own words, and then...
Well, it's really interesting what you say about this, about the mythology that we were taught at school, because I think Liz and I feel exactly the same. We've both of us always loved mythology and films, books, musicals, whatever. But we were always taught the kind of Greco-Roman myths, and with a very male slant. And so it felt like just a really, we always write our books from a place of curiosity, and this felt like a really good way to look at myths from around the world, look at these amazing female deities and see what they could teach us about how to live today.
Yeah, so the book has got 26 different chapters, 26 different goddesses from all corners of the globe, and they're all very different, but for each one, as we did in What Would Boudicca Do, we've picked a kind of problem or attribute or something that modern women would maybe find relevant in their stories that we can learn from, because a lot of these goddesses contribute to damaging stereotypes about women that have come down through the stories that are about them, but also really inspiring examples of women with power, which is just a very seductive and enjoyable thing to be researching and reading.
Yes, and has it, before we start from the readings, I'm going to ask a question about, which I was going to ask later, but I feel excited now, whether it has had an effect on your day-to-day living and in your personal and professional lives, because you're both editors for big publishing houses. So I was wondering if you've suddenly...
Well, there's quite a lot of COVID-related lessons, I suppose, having worked in the weird way that we've worked in the last 6 months.
Yes.
There's quite a lot of stuff about mental health and self-care. You can mention that, but one of the big lessons that we write about Baba Yaga, who's a Russian witch, a very powerful Russian witch, and we write about her and not saying sorry. And one of the tips that we write about in the book, and I've really started doing it to myself, is like, just don't use that word in emails. So instead of saying I'm sorry, I didn't send you I forgot to attach the document, you just say I didn't attach the document, here it is now. And there's something, I know you think it's really sulky, but it's actually quite powerful to be able to I don't know, to just step back from that word that I think women use or really overuse. I know men do it, actually the British do it generally, but it does feel quite liberating. I've enjoyed that, particularly over the last 6 months when I feel like I should have been saying sorry for quite a lot of things. It's been good.
Yeah, and actually similarly, probably the goddess one of the ones I really enjoyed writing about and learning about is an Irish goddess called the Morrigan. We do her on being a bitch and not being nice, and it sort of is a similar thing, which is the idea of women having to be kind of compliant and cosy and friendly, and And she is absolutely none of those things at all. She's like a death warrior goddess who is always causing trouble, incredibly melodramatic and theatrical. So her stories are a lot of fun. But again, this idea of not kind of taking the world's weight on you and having to apologise for it all, it's probably actually quite a similar thing. But we do also have a Roman, Gallo-Roman goddess called Epona on adaptability, and that's one that I've been kind of trying to hang on to Epona a bit, because we've all had to be very adaptable recently. And we have Australian founding spirits called the Wawalak sisters on resilience, which again is something that I think a lot of people have had to kind of, reach down into themselves and try and find that resilience. So strangely, a lot of the goddesses have become, they genuinely have kind of, they've come to my mind in certain circumstances in quite a helpful way.
Yes, as I was reading through, I was definitely picking up on what I really liked about the goddess who is about was it the Morrigan with the bitch?
Yeah, exactly.
And it was really liberating to think that if you do stand up for yourself, that I think you wrote just a plain sentence like, at some point someone's going to think you're a bitch. And actually that's not a terrible thing if you perhaps aren't, But I think perhaps you could explain that. I don't know if you're going to cover the Morrigan, but she's just one of the fascinating ones.
She is. I think she's a sign that you're doing something right, really. If you can't really be kind of living your best life and you looking after yourself properly unless you do fall out with people sometimes,
rub up against people, or
have confrontations with people sometimes. And I think, again, it's something that, from talking to our friends, confrontation and women and power balances and all of those things can sometimes feel a bit more difficult, but she's a really great example because she's very good at confronting people, and she has a lot of value in that, and she gains a lot of value in that.
So would you like to read, I know you've prepared a couple of readings, would you like to read a couple for us, and then we can have a chat after?
Okay, cool. So I'm going to read some of the chapter on a Sumerian goddess called Inanna, and we write about her and embracing ambition. So I'll start. When we think of female ambition, we think of that tired trope of a bitch businesswoman with boobs of steel, clambering without a backward glance over the still twitching bodies of her colleagues in her ruthless pursuit of power. For men, ambition is associated with drive, success, and confidence. The double standard is wearying. But what if we could move away from gendered stereotypes to find a way to harness our inner achievers without having to give a second thought to how people perceived us? Arch-goddess Inanna, queen of heaven herself, was worshipped across ancient Mesopotamia, and her huge popularity belies the fact that she sometimes got up to some extraordinary and frankly questionable antics in order to fulfill her ambitions. Mesopotamians were the first urbanites. They loved a metropolis, and each city had its own god. Inanna's neighbourhood was the melodiously named Uruk, but their cities were fragile, plagued by the twin terrors of flood and drought, as well as war, and these very real threats lie at the heart of their mythology. And it's a good example of the way that humanity has always used stories to deal with the tribulations it faces. So Inanna was the goddess of love, sex, beauty and desire, but also war, fighting and politics. She's often depicted standing on a lion as a sign of her immense power. It's not difficult to see why she was so revered and adored. She's got a heady combo going on, which reflected the contradictions at the heart of Mesopotamian culture, a culture that could be benevolent and vicious, fearless and protective, all at the same time. Inanna features in more fables than any other Mesopotamian god or goddess, and many of the myths around her describe quite breathtaking ambition, often seizing control of other gods' territory with relish. So Inanna's father was Enki, god of water and also guardian of the Mes, which were the sacred powers doled out to various gods and goddesses so they could order the world and bring together civilization. Inanna was not ready to settle with her apportioned lot, so she nursed an ambition to make her city and therefore herself even more of a powerhouse. She set off in her heavenly boat to ask her dad for more. She charms Enki, and they sit down to have a nice dinner together. Essentially, she gets him incredibly drunk, and as he slips further and further into the sauce, he demonstrates more and more largesse, a byproduct of booze that many of us can recognise. When he wakes up with a banging head, he finds Inanna has vanished with more than 100 mes he's accidentally handed to her, and she's wangled some of the big guns: godship, the throne of kingship, truth, sex, wisdom, fear and music. So it's pretty good lot. Another famous story involves Inanna heading to the underworld to try to seize it from her sister, Erishkigal, the Queen of Hell. Inanna's married to a young shepherd god who she leaves at home while she gets on with the important business of usurping. It doesn't go well. At each post of hell she needs to walk through, a gatekeeper demands she removes an item of clothing, so finally she arrives in front of her sister, defenceless and starkers. Her attempted takedown is a disaster. She's sentenced to death and impaled on a spike. Only her father, Enki, sweeps in to rescue her. She flees away from the underworld, but comes back to find her husband's been living it up in her absence, lounging on a throne surrounded by beautiful women. She's royally pissed off and sends her husband to the underworld to take her place. But in the end, she shows an impressive level of compromise. Dumuzi will emerge in the upper worlds and return to Inanna, and his sister will go to the underworld to bring spring. So some might say she's got herself the perfect relationship. We know so much about Inanna because of the Sumerian priestess Enheduanna, who actually featured in What Would Boudicca Do. She's humanity's first named author, and she wrote hymns and poems dedicated to Inanna, celebrating her beautiful, terrifying, awe-inspiring attributes. Inanna inspired complete devotion and loyalty because she could represent all the elements of the spectrum, from light to dark. We're not suggesting you charm, steal and confront your way to the top, as Inanna often did, but she's a powerful role model when it comes to the idea of envisaging your goals, preparing properly, and showing determination in going for them, and also revelling in the praise your achievements bring. Too often, women attribute their successes to luck or serendipity, and instead we should look to own them, as Inanna did. So leave the ambition to the men, rip up the script, and embrace your inner Inanna.
Brilliant, thank you. Did you have
Shall I read about Uzume?
Oh, yes.
So Uzume, this is the picture of
Yeah.
Uzume that Georgia did. Do you want to show Inanna?
Yes, I should.
Yes,
shouldn't
yes,
I?
they're
Here's
so
Inanna.
good.
Here's
So it's
Inanna.
on her lion.
On her lion.
Her crown.
Lion between the legs.
Exactly.
Yes. So we do Uzume on laughing at yourself. The Japanese Shinto goddess Uzume is a breath of fresh air. Her special talent is to turn a bad situation into something positive, using the power of her sense of humour. A gift for comedy is often underappreciated or considered less important than more serious attributes, but sharing humour can bind people together and definitely makes life more enjoyable. Laughter has been found by scientists to boost your immune system, lower your stress levels, and even protect against heart disease. So perhaps we should all be making more effort to open ourselves up to the lighter side of life. Next time you're feeling a little touchy or low-spirited, turn to Uzume. Shinto is unusual in world religions for having a goddess, Amaterasu, as the central deity. She is the sun goddess, and also the ancestor of the Japanese emperor's family. She's represented by the sun disk on the Japanese national flag. One of her brothers is the god of the moon, in a twist on the more familiar dynamic in which the flashier golden sun is male and the shy, retiring moon is female. And the black sheep of their family is her bad boy other brother, the storm god Susanoo. Like many of us mere mortals, Susanoo and Amaterasu had a volatile sibling relationship. During one extreme row, where he threw a horse at her, Amaterasu decided she'd had enough and sealed herself up in a cave. Because she was the sun, her exit had the unfortunate effect of plunging the world into total darkness. So the other gods set to work trying to persuade her to give up her subterranean alone time. This proved tricky until clever Uzume tried something unexpected. She threw together a theatrical outfit, including a moss belt and a leaf headdress, and cracked out a high-energy dance number, during which she flashed her bits and boobs at the other gods to make them laugh. Who among us can hear the sound of other people laughing without feeling a burning desire to get in on the joke? Amaterasu couldn't resist investigating the rules of hilarity and stepped out of her cave to see what was going on. Once outside, she was distracted by her own blazingly beautiful reflection in a mirror Uzume had hung on a branch, and the other gods sealed up the cave entrance behind her. Amaterasu found Uzume's moves so enjoyable, she agreed to stay and light up the world again. So Uzume became the goddess of the dawn because she brought the sun out of darkness. She's clearly the goddess of happiness and laughter because she turned a frightening situation into something warm and convivial by casting aside her own vanity and having an infectiously good time. There's a tedious discussion that rears its head periodically in the media about whether women are as funny as men. Their lack of visibility on comedy panel shows and writers' rooms is cited as proof that girls just can't raise the chuckles. If you look at online chat about this subject, there are an awful lot of helpful blokes making it clear they don't find jokes about periods funny. So who knows what they would have thought of Uzume flashing her lady guard on. White, cis, heterosexual men have had the dominant voice in our society for centuries, so there's often a lot of noise when something isn't purposefully designed to please them. The men are just funnier line is often explained by evolutionary theories that male animals tend to have to put on a show to attract mates, whereas females just sit around judging them, and therefore not honing any witty badinage or fancy feather displays themselves. However, recent scientific studies suggest that this gendered view of humour is more of a self-fulfilling stereotype than an objective truth. Women making jokes are judged more harshly than men, and recent research shows that colleagues are more likely to define women's jokes as disruptive, where men's are considered helpful. Humour is often associated with extroverts, can even be combative, which connects it to high-status individuals. So Azume's self-confidence worked in her favour. She was, after all, also known as the heavenly alarming female. The unfunny lady image is one of many negative female stereotypes. It's connected to both the trouble women have being taken seriously in the first place and cultural anxiety over women making displays of themselves. Isn't it better for everyone if they're at home quietly knitting instead of out there flaunting themselves? Uzume's ability to make fun of herself is connected with her bravery. Often the things we fear most in everyday life is embarrassing ourselves. Again and again people cite fear of humiliation as the strongest force holding them back from following their dreams or stepping outside their comfort zones. If we can embrace the joy of laughing at ourselves like Uzume, we neutralise shame and get to enjoy the sunshine of a happy and fulfilled life.
Thank you very much for both the readings. Yes, Azumi was one of my favourites, I must say, that I didn't know about, and also I think specifically because of her playfulness and her flashing her bits and boobs or bobs, which I now realise where perhaps bits and bobs come from. And I think it's really relevant to, like, today there was the announcement of the Comedy Women in Print Award, which is a new prize for Nina Stibbe won it, who's a friend of the shop. And it all seems in relation to what men think about women being funny as well. A lot of the discussion that went on Radio 4 I was a bit sort of frustrated by, because it was all in relation to what men think about comedy rather than what women think about their own comedy. And I was wondering what we could learn from Azumi, I suppose, still, is that she's kind of her own thing, and I don't know if she's really doing it in relation to a male gaze or audience, but she seems to be just sort of outside of it slightly and just a bit of a maverick.
She's not a siphon, is she?
She's very, I think she is, and she is this kind of unusually bold kind of female deity, and she is interacting with the kind of chief goddess as well. What she's doing for the chief goddess in order to bring her out, make her happy, bring the sun back to the world. There's a lot of discussion, because she sort of does a striptease, there's a lot of, when we were researching it, there's obviously quite a lot of the male critics are very interested in the striptease element of it. And but that connects, when we were researching the book as a whole, there's a lot about the sun and the earth and kind of female generative power, and the idea of her striptease has been interpreted to do with the sun kind of lighting up the earth, and that then bringing forth everything
fertility
needs for
and
life,
etc.
So, but she is a fun one, because she is also quite scary, and there's that thing with humour where it's always sort of it's the most funny things are usually slightly on the edge, aren't they? And she's quite, another story about her where she's quite scary is she's tasked with kind of preparing the earth for what the god who ends up being the kind of great grandfather of the imperial royal family, and she comes down and she gets all the animals to swear allegiance to him, but there is one, the sea cucumber can't, because it doesn't have a mouth. So she takes a dagger and cuts its mouth open so that it can swear allegiance. So she's got, there's definitely a dangerous side to her as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. So how did you mentioned a bit about researching? So how do you go about going through all the sort of the well-established sort of versions of these myths and where they've been recorded, and then you get to perhaps where you can see the gap between what has been said and what could have been.
Yeah.
How did you go to the British Library, or when you could? But what was your sort of?
I mean,
do you have a method?
We read a lot around
Yeah.
it. We've got a sort of long bibliography at the back of the book, which has some of the things we read and some further reading as well. And I think we went into it with a real sense of that we knew that these stories through the centuries have been basically told by men, and wouldn't it be fun to give our own kind of reinterpretation and our own take on it? And like, you're completely right, you exactly see those sort of moments where you could interpret a story one way, or you could interpret it an entirely different way from a kind of female perspective, I suppose, and we just had a lot of fun playing around with those moments.
Because Blodeuwedd, who's the Welsh flower goddess in the book, she's one of those ones where very clearly her story was probably invented by a man, was certainly recorded by a monk, and that's how it's come down to us. And she is a woman or a kind of supernatural woman who was created by two men in order to solve a kind of curse problem that they had out of flowers. So she's made out of flowers to be the perfect wife for this man. And then she actually runs off with another guy, which is not at all the plan, because she's supposed to essentially be a sort of sex bot that they have created, for his enjoyment and for his kind of social standing. And then she takes on her own agency. It's like all of those kind of films about what happens if the robots turn against us. She actually kind of does do that. And obviously at the time where that story was first being told, that was like aren't women terrible? You can't trust them an inch, kind of story. But for us, that's like, wow, she was in this oppressive, coercive relationship, and she made her own choices, and didn't necessarily end well for her. She ended up being turned into an owl, but she made her own choices, and she got rid of the idea that the narrative that the men had created for her, and kind of went outside it, and so that was one where it was very clear. Yeah,
and it was an interesting thing where a lot of actually the really ancient goddesses had less of that, because they were religions or mythologies that had died out, so they hadn't gone through the kind of Victorian
the Christianization
of the story, exactly, which was essentially a very patriarchal way of looking at it. So like Inanna and some of the South American ones that you were they're very
they're quite wild.
They're wilder, really
less of that kind of beautiful, lovely wavy hair goddess idea,
right?
And more. There's an amazing Aztec goddess who we wanted to put in the book. She's in a footnote, but because we were trying to pick the best stories to kind of unravel, she doesn't have very many recorded stories. But she's called Tlaltecutli. She is this amazing goddess who is. She's a squatting goddess with ravening mouths on her knees and her elbows. Wow. And she's covered in alligator skin, and there's like kind of teeth everywhere, and she's constantly screaming for the blood of sacrificial victims. And you're kind of like, okay, that's quite different to Botticelli's Venus. But really lovely to, know that there's this, her image was only ever put on the bottom of stoneware jars where people would put the hearts of sacrificial victims.
Right.
Because she was so powerful and dark and dangerous that her image had to be in contact with the earth rather than out in the sky.
Yeah.
And there's quite a lot of that, isn't there? Baba Yaga as well.
Yeah.
And, all of those kind of the Morrigan too. There's like a darkness, and kind of a lot of these goddesses are in charge of death as well as life.
Yeah.
So,
and the ones we were really drawn to were the ones that had this sort of really disruptive power or chaotic power as well, that sort of upended all of our ideas about preconceived ideas of what a goddess should be.
Because you've moved really around the world with these goddesses. But closer to home is the Selkie one, who I have heard. In fact, I hadn't heard of most of these, but the Selkie I think is talked about a little bit more. Or having Scottish heritage myself,
me too.
I felt like I knew, perhaps had a little feeling of it in me.
Yeah.
And this has just confirmed it.
Yes. Tell me about it. No, I feel she was very we really liked writing about her, but because there's this sort of there's a myth that, again, written by a man, an Orkney poet, where a man steals it. So Selkies are these shape-shifting creatures that live in the sea, but they come onto rocks to sunbathe, and they take their skins off and turn into these beautiful men and women who mere mortals seem to fall for the whole time. Anyway, this one man who's a very eligible bachelor from Orkney Island, who's rejected all the local women because he thinks all women are good for trouble, like Eve. But he spies this Selkie with her sealskin off and steals the sealskin, and so she's forced to come and live with him. And they have this, on the surface of it, beautiful. They have these 4 beautiful children. They have this the bonniest children in the land. They have this lovely house that looks out to sea. But whenever she sings, children stop playing and like animals stop feeding. So there's definitely a sadness going on there. And one day she tricks her 3 of her children are away collecting cockles on the beach. The husband is away, and she tricks her youngest daughter into telling her where the sealskin is because he's hidden it somewhere in the house. And she puts it back on and just immediately runs. And I don't know if it's to do with me being in lockdown with my family over 6 months, but that really spoke to me through all of this. But there is something really transgressive about rejecting this kind of gilded life that
the domesticity.
But essentially she's in that was again a really interesting one where you've got this poem about her or a story about her, but she's essentially in a coercive relationship.
Like, she's been kidnapped.
Yeah, she's been kidnapped, exactly. So she was fun. She was fun to write about.
Yeah, and you have the Selkie wife and saying no.
Yes, that's right. So
and so how did you come to that, the idea of that sort of subtitle about her?
Yeah, we did it. We came about the sort of subjects and the deities that we wanted to look at. Whenever we've written these books, we sort of have 2 kind of lists going on in our heads of I think we start with the stories and we start with the subjects, and then actually you have when you're doing the research, it's lovely when these moments pop out and you think that is perfect for that subject.
This subject that we want to
exactly.
cover.
And then so it's quite a sort of organic process, isn't it? But we definitely have a list. We start probably with the list of the subjects that we think modern, or that us and our friends often feel like we would like to
do with some help.
Yes,
from
exactly. Yeah.
And it was the same with Boudicca. We had that. We had like issues that we felt were really coming up a lot in conversation between women and about women that we thought women from history in that book could help with. And with this, it was sort of the other element to it was because so many of these myths have become these sort of very lapidary kind of ideals of what a woman is. So it feeds into stereotypes a lot more because you kind of think about Athena and strong women, and you think about Aphrodite and sexy women, and so that gave us another angle to approach. Was what are the damaging stereotypes, and what are the stories about these goddesses actually saying that maybe undercut some of those stereotypes, or through our eyes we see a way that they undercut it.
So how would you think about, because I sort of quite interested in getting the message out to, apart from selling the book, but how do you think we could sort of get these stories to perhaps teenage girls more? I mean, have you been asked to do any readings?
I mean, actually that was one element of the previous. I think people don't really want you going into schools at the moment, but one element of what Boudicca Do is actually we found when we were doing events, there were loads of young teenagers, and actually in the event we did here as well, it was brilliant because we hadn't. I mean, I'm the mother of 3 daughters, and one of them is about 12. So it's that. So she's suddenly really interested in this. But it's really that's a great thing to be able to sort of harness. And
there's such great stories as well. So there's lots of angles on it. But I think it's because at school still you're quite focused on the Romans and the Greeks still. I think.
Yeah, and Egypt.
And it's in Egypt. Yeah. It's odd because we realised that actually the Celtic heritage that you would expect to be very prominent in this education system of this country is not there at all. So the Celtic goddesses were quite new to us in many ways, and we definitely were familiar. And I can see why, because you look at Renaissance art and you look at literature, and all of those Greek and Roman myths have been so incredibly influential. But there's so much more out there. We didn't know much about kind of the mythology of the Americas before we started researching, and then there are so many great stories there, and obviously from the Asian goddesses that we looked at too. So.
And the Scandinavian ones, brilliant. So Bivy
was a great Scandinavian one.
So she's we write about her in mental health, and she was worshipped by the Sami people as the Sami people in northern Finland, and they live through these very dark, long winters of 6 months, and she is the goddess of the sun, so when she returns it's like this moment of regeneration. But they also put offerings to her for people who'd essentially suffered from SAD for seasonal affective disorder for the 6 months. They were really conscious of that as a phenomenon, which I found really moving, that these people, that these kind of civilizations thousands of years ago were thinking about prioritising the mental well-being of their communities in a really interesting way. So there's definitely really interesting lessons to be learned from them.
Well, I think so, and I feel like, there's the current thing with sculptures, in streets, if we could have more sort of visibility, because it's interesting that you know that some countries still have have them in Japan. You've got people still doing a version of the dance.
Oh yeah, and loads of the goddesses in this book are still worshipped and revered, and are they're living religions. And I think it's just this country is quite secular, and obviously there's a Christian heritage where there's a sort of very male. Obviously the Virgin Mary is a big deal, but there's a it's a male focus in the religion. But lots of other religions do have really significant female figures and supernatural female figures in them. So
yes, there was a mention of a particular one that interested me that's adopted by the LGBT community. What was that?
Oh, you're going to really test my memory now.
This is it?
Yes,
African.
Yes, so Ocean is.
Ocean, that's it.
Yeah.
I'll just show.
So
I'll just show that one because it's such a great.
She's a Yoruba goddess.
Yeah.
So
it's great.
But because of the amazing influence of Yoruba culture on the world in general, which is partly to do with the diaspora and then the slave trade carrying people over to the Americas from Western Africa. A lot of the religions and the kind of traditional religions in places like Cuba and in South America that have large communities of people who have descend from Yoruba ancestors. Those gods exist in a slightly different form in Santeria or Candomblé, and often they're syncretized with Christian figures. So that a lot of them. So Ocean is also connected very strongly to the Virgin Mary, although she's a very different goddess in her kind of original form. But she has been embraced by the LGBTQI community as a protector in many of those religions. And there are other gods and goddesses as well where, even Aphrodite, who we think of as because there's all the stories are about kind of,
how sexy
her and Aries. And all the kind of men she got off with. Yeah. She was actually worshipped as a kind of androgynous goddess, and again adopted as a goddess who looked after people of all different kind of sexualities and gender expression. So a lot of them are a lot more open than you think.
That's why Kylie Minogue chose.
Yes, I'm sure that's right.
My partner's a massive Kylie fan, and she just said, "Well, that's why Kylie chose."
Yeah, absolutely.
But we won't go there. But I was rather pleased that there was this sort of thought process going on of sort of caring over her audience as well, which is interesting. So it's a brilliant book, and it really is like sort of dipping your toe into so many different things. I feel it should be sort of given to every young person who's interested. I'm going to give it to my. Don't watch this, Nancy, but I'm going to give it to my god niece for her 13th birthday, because I feel like it's such a great book. Yeah. But so is this, because you're publishing wildly, wildly. I mean, 2 books and the others. But is this the start of? Do you think more books still? Is there something on the boil, or can you not really speak about it?
I mean, I hope so. We love writing together, and we love. We've been writing together for like more than 10 years,
Yes,
haven't we?
we have.
And
Yeah.
we both, the process has really changed over the years, but we really enjoy it. We both work, as you said, in publishing, so one of the key bits that we love is the editing
Yes,
of each
we do
other.
like editing each other.
And we're very good natured about it, aren't we?
Yeah, surprisingly so. Yeah.
There are definitely things bubbling away, and it's a fun process.
And both being editors then, and both editing each other, do you now have each other's sort of editing voices in your head when you're writing?
Well,
Yes,
what you hope is that when you read the book, you wouldn't see something like, oh, that's the bit that Liz wrote, or that's the bit that Beth wrote. It should hopefully feel like one voice.
There certainly was one bit when I was writing one line in one of the, because the way we've done it with this one is we've divided the chapters up, so we do a first draft of, we research separately each goddess, and then we do a first draft, and then we swap it back and forth. But there was one, I can't remember which one it was, but there was one where I wrote a line and I was like, wow, that is like Beth's voice. Just like she's speaking through like
weird.
a music bar.
Amazing.
Channeling each other.
Yeah, absolutely. You got us.
That seems quite appropriate for a lot of the characters in this book. But I do hope you continue to publish more and more, and we get further and further into a feminist sort of reading of history. But it's really great. So I know you're going to sign some books for us, but I'd like to just thank you on behalf of Bookseller Crow for coming. And let's have a round of applause. We're not quite in an empty bookshop. Thank you so much for coming. I know we're going to sell lots of copies of this.
Thank you.
They can find you a book for your girlfriend, your husband, your girl or your boy. And if you've got a need for an uplifting read, Justine and Jonathan
Good evening,
can pick out
everyone,
a
at
book
Bookseller
you'll
Crow.
enjoy. What a book at the Bookseller Crow on the hill. What a book at the Bookseller Crow on the hill.